زكاتك تدفع عنك البلاء وتحفظ مالك أن أقام.
الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to part 12 of the short series on contemporary laws related to zakat. Today we will be doing a worked example. We'll be how a person will calculate whether they are liable for zakat in of the nisab and holding that nisab for a period of 1 year. So let's get into the example. Looking at an example of Zaid. Zaid began working on the 1st of Sha'ban, 1433, and he received his first salary of 50,000 Rand on the 1st of Ramadan, 1433. Prior to this, Zaid only had cash amount of 4,200 Rand, and he had no other assets or liabilities except his personal effects. Now, for purposes of this example, let us assume that the nisab in South Africa at this point in time is around 9,000 rands. So prior to the receipt of his salary, they did not have the nisab. Now we're looking at a few different scenarios so that we can understand the various permutations with regards to nisab and the lunar year. Scenario number one, Zaid on the 1st of Ramadan, 1444. So we're now fast forwarding 1 lunar year from the date that he received the 50,000 Rand of his salary. Zaid has 55,000 Rand available to him, and his wealth remained above the nisab of 9,000 Rand throughout the year. So that's scenario number one. Scenario number two, 1 year after receiving his salary on the 1st of Ramadan, 1444, he only has 3,100 rands at that point in time. But for the rest of the year, his wealth was above the nisab of 9,000 rands. Scenario number three, he is in debt of 15,000 rands. And scenario number four, he has 25,000 rands. But during this year, between 1443 and 1444, there is a mistake and a typo in the top there. It should be 1443, not 1433. Between 1443 and 1444, he lost all wealth. So how would we treat this? Now, let's look at the first scenario. He received his salary on the 1st of Ramadan, 1443. Prior to that, he did not own the minimum amount of nisab. Fast forward 1 year, the entire year he had more than 9,000 Rand in his possession, and he now has 55,000 Rand. So he's ticked the box that he had the nisab amount on the 1st of Ramadan, 1443. He had that wealth in his possession, and he had more than the nisab for the entire year. And at the end of the year, he has 55,000 Rand, which is more than the nisab. So we take whatever he has. Let's assume this is the only zakatable wealth that he has, 55,000 Rand times 2.5%, and his zakat liability is 1,375 Rands. Scenario number two, he received nisab on the 1st of Ramadan, 1443. He managed to maintain nisab throughout the entire year, but on the 1st of Ramadan, 1444, which is now when we would have to look at whether he had the wealth for 1 year or not, his wealth has now dipped down to 3,100 Rands. So he is not liable for zakat as he does not possess the wealth of nisab 1 year later. Right? So although he had it for the entire year, but on his annual now zakat date, that should have been his zakat date, he does not possess the minimum amount of nisab. Scenario number C, fairly straightforward. He's in debt of 15,000 Rands. So he, of course, does not have any wealth. He does not have the minimum amount of nisab, and therefore he is not liable for zakat. The last scenario, he's sitting with 25,000 Rand 1 year later. So he had nisab on the 1st of Ramadan, 1443. He has nisab on the 1st of Ramadan, 1444. So it seems like a year has passed, but midway through the year, he's lost all his wealth. He went down to zero or even negative. Now, the principle here is that when your wealth goes down to zero, you reset your zakat calculation period. Therefore, we will not look at the 1st of Ramadan, 1444, as his annual date. We will need to look at what date during the year did he now acquire or reacquire the nisab, and we will start looking at 1 year from that date. So for example, if he acquired it on the 29th of Zulhijjah 1443, he now reacquired nisab, he's back up above 9,000 rands. We will look 1 year forward, on the 29th of Zulhijjah 1444, and we will assess whether he still has nisab at that point in time. So important here, his zakat year has now been reset as a result of the fact that he lost all of his wealth. This brings us to the end of this worked example. An important note: in order for you to understand this example, you should have gone through the previous videos, so you'd be able to apply the principles that we've looked at in the previous videos and understand the context here. Subhanallahi wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
لذلك قال الرسول الكريم فلد بالنداء تفز بالمرام.